morning, James.
Good morning, Aaron.
Welcome to Leadership Unplugged. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
We've known each other for a few years. We've helped each other through business-related activity and friendship-style activity, life activities.
Yes, absolutely. Like dogs.
Like dogs. And I'm still trying to train my dog at the moment, which is making me want to pull my hair out a little bit. But we might pick up that conversation a bit later on. But thank you for coming on. I think some of the stuff we wanted to discuss today was around your expertise, in particular from a tech perspective and a tech startup and tech scale-up perspective. Some of the challenges that organizations might be facing as we enter 2023 and as we continue through 2023, and how that might be different to challenges that have been experienced over the last couple of years with the way VC funding is going, etc. And maybe just get a bit of your perspective on where tech is going, what might be big in tech over the next couple of years, because there's been a lot of changes and advancements in technology, hasn't there?
Yeah, there has.
But let's start with, for the viewers and the listeners, a bit about yourself, what you do, your background, so we've got a bit of context, and then we'll dive in.
Perfect. Yeah. So my name's James Morgan-Yates. I'm currently Chief Technology Officer for a startup called EditCloud. I won't talk too much and try and plug the company too much, but in a nutshell, we're here to help the production industry and the media industry try and bring talent to the areas where people need to produce content. Content has gone through a massive explosion with people like Netflix and Amazon Studios, and there is a shortage of talent. EditCloud is about opening up the doors to allow anyone, anywhere who's talented in post-production to be able to access equipment and the footage and the jobs, so that it's not the same old people from a Soho post-production house doing content. It opens up a much bigger global market. Myself, I come from a long background, something like 28 years in software development, cloud, broadcast. I started off as a very junior person in a development team and slowly worked my way up. So I know what it's like to be the guys on the coalface, the people in the companies that really do make the difference. And that's the people, not the leaders. They're only there to sort of guide the people that actually do the work. And I'm a big believer in that your staff are your biggest and most important tool, because if they're not actively working or working effectively, then the company is not effective. And I've always tried to put my teams and my staff ahead of myself. And where things go wrong, you jump in and help the team, because everything is about the success of the company, and your team is paramount to that. I've worked for a number of companies, startups, small companies, larger companies. Most recently, I was Chief Technology Officer for a company called Clearcast, which, if you come from the advertising background in the UK, they're owned by the major broadcasters of the UK and pre-clear all TV advertising that you see on TV to check it doesn't breach any regulations. I was there for 11 years, did some relatively transformative projects to sort of evolve the way that broadcast advertising works. I think broadcast advertising is very, there's a lot of legacy, but it does what it does very, very well, just very expensive, and very can be very people intensive. And part of my role was to look at automation and how we could work smarter and better to reduce barriers to market for advertising, so that it's not just the huge multinationals that get to advertise, but your local fish and chip restaurants could get onto places like Sky Plus and advertise on there. So I've got a long history of background as a developer, and more recently I've taken into more leadership roles in company leadership and industry leadership. That's me.
Excellent. What did you start out in what programming language?
I started out, that's a really interesting question. So combination of Basic, Visual Basic, Delphi, C and C++. I was multifaceted, I think. Wow. Just in terms of whatever came up. I wrote a system that took all of the software repository, and every night would build it for the development team that I worked for. And that gave me sort of an in to start working on commercial projects and products. I worked within a team that was around master control and automation for television stations. At that time, major stuff. And I I started doing some of the sort of that auxiliary ancillary apps to do with post-production, post-transmission, to do with things like logging, outrun logs, etc., and slowly sort of worked my way forwards. It was hard work, but it was rewarding.
Look where we are now. Was Clearcast the first broadcasting thing that you did?
I worked in broadcast all of my life, but Clearcast was the first broadcaster-owned company that I worked for.
Okay. Was that, it's interesting because we've never actually talked about this before in previous conversations. Was that because you love something to do with that industry, or because you just fell into it?
Combination of both, really. My previous role, I worked in a startup, and we were making a system to do with addressable advertising, and that gave me sort of a footstep into scheduling and ad scheduling and dealing with ad agencies and stuff. And then the opportunity at Clearcast came up, and one of the things I really loved about Clearcast was really their role is all about protecting consumers from misleading and harmful advertising. That's what they're there for. And that really resonates with me because there's a real ethical part of that, because no one wants to be ripped off. And there is, you only have to go onto the internet and you see loads of false claims and celebrities being used for false advertising without their permission. Clearcast is there to make sure that if you see an advert on TV, the claims that are made have properly checked by proper experts. And so if they say 8 out of 10 women say their skin looks visibly younger, that has been scientifically proven, and it's not just someone making it up to sell you a product.
Right. Okay. How do you think this changes as we move forward, whether it's a Clearcast or somewhere else? But we've got an entire challenge on our hands, haven't we? That there's more and more data coming into the world. Everything is more and more tech driven. So from my perspective, I would assume that it's easier and easier to take advantage of people and do unethical things. Do you think that's a real challenge that the world is facing moving forward?
I think it's probably the number one challenge we've got at the moment. Technology has massively accelerated all of our capabilities, and regulation, government regulation and laws just aren't keeping pace with that. You look at the online bill that the government are recently trying to put through, trying to protect particularly children from misleading and harmful content. It's 10, 15, 20 years too late. It really is. And it's, advertising is just one extreme. But, you've got other areas of the internet, the darker places where, kids particularly get access to content that they really shouldn't be seeing. No one should really be seeing that. But, it opens up our world. And I think regulation needs to drastically change and quickly to make sure that people are protected.
Whose responsibility do you think that regulation is?
So I think the regulation is the responsibility of the government, but I don't think the tech companies are completely safe from this. I believe that they have a duty and there's a right for them to take proactive steps to make sure that the technology and advancements that they're bringing are positive, net positive, and not detrimental to society.
Wouldn't it be safe to assume, though, that if the rate of change in the private sector and of technology within the private sector is probably always going to move faster than the public sector and government? So it's always going to be catch up, isn't it?
It is always going to be catch up, but there should be a small window of catch up, not 10, 20 years. It's been, it was, the internet was around in the 90s, and nothing has really come in until this decade really, or the past 10 years. It shouldn't take that long for government to start looking at this. And it's not just in technology, this is in all areas. You look at regulation on alcohol and vaping, for example, is massively underregulated, in my opinion. I think as a society, we've got to look, as things evolve, look at what's going on and say, is this right for society? What do we need to do to make sure that we can protect the children, and the people of the future?
I think we end up in a bit of massive debate there then as well, don't we? When you have, because the private sector might argue, well, who decides what's right and wrong, other than the most obvious examples, but that you're also getting into the debate of right and wrong, aren't you? And what is ethical, what is unethical, etc. What about the grey areas that sit within that? Like, and who does that fall down to protect?
It's a really tricky one, and what I've just been saying, it massively oversimplifies what we're talking about here. I think everyone has a right and a duty. We should all be looking out for each other. So if you're a startup company, or if you're a big corporation, you should be thinking about society and not just about your shareholders and your profit line. I really do think that, and as a result, I'm very careful about the companies I work for. I've long had a thing: I will never work for anyone in gambling or in military, just because those two. Not that I disagree necessarily with the military. I just don't want to be a part of something that would cause harm to someone. So I'm very careful in that respect. And I think society just needs to be very careful that it's great to accelerate change, have new things, but we've got to look at what the implications are of those.
Agreed. When you look at certain startups and scale-ups that have a positive message in the world and are trying to do things for the better of humanity, how true do you think that is? Or is that a facade of marketing because what they actually care about is making money?
I think it's very much on a case-by-case basis. I think there are people that ultimately start out to do the right thing, and that's what they live and believe, and what they live by. I think there are people that just go out just to make money. It's just the next startup. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'm just out there to make money, sell the company, and move on to the next thing. And then I think there's a majority of people that start out with good intentions, but as the company grows and gets successful, and then you've got VCs and you've got board of directors and you've got shareholders that are wanting more and more, increasing sales, increasing in size, increasing profits. The fundamental startings of the company can get lost in the weeds. And I think that's what you've got to be very careful of as a startup.
Do you think, without getting into a massively political debate and annoying a lot of people, what do you think it matters? Because let's say you do tech for good and you're doing something that has a positive impact in the world, and you're the founder and the only thing you care about is making money. But if you only care about making money and that company becomes successful and indirectly because of that, what you do is tech for good, then that's a positive thing.
It is a positive thing. I totally agree. And that's fine when that happens. But, I'll give you an example. I'm not a big fan of social media, full stop, because it does bring a lot of positive benefits, but it brings a lot of negativity. And you have a company that says that, we don't allow people under the age of 13 to use our platform, yet millions of under 13s use it every day. And we can't stop it. Yet we can target an advert to you on your screen within your social media feed from something you've just looked at in a browser. How can they target advertising at you to that degree, yet not be able to work out if someone's not of right age? And I think that's where technology and innovation needs to be balanced. It's not just about innovating to do something new and something no one else has done. You've also got to look at the ethical side in society and say, okay, well, let's invest some of that time, not all of it, but some of that time and some of that money into making sure that our innovation isn't becoming harmful in any way.
Yeah, absolutely. And ultimately, technology is neither good or bad, is it? It's the people that are using technology to do what they want to do.
Absolutely, yes. I totally agree with that.
And unless we start to head into AI territory, which learns as it's moving along.
Let's not talk about systems being plugged in with completely autonomous making decisions on our behalf. Yes, that's a scary world.
So link into some of the ethical and regulatory things. One of the hot topics that I've been discussing with people recently is around cybersecurity specifically and the security of your own data. So aside from the ethical standpoint, the actual machinations, I guess, of is my data safe? Because every day that goes by, there's more and more data on me. There's cloud environment is bigger and bigger. Like that, everything is running off of the idea that data is interconnected, which then means that becomes a bigger and bigger boon and is a good thing because we can do more positive things. But at the same time, that balance is slipping towards, well, if somebody's able to get into your data, then a lot of things negatively impact because they ripple out through it. What's your thoughts on cybersecurity generally?
So I would separate cybersecurity and personal data security as two completely different topics. But if we're talking about personal or private data protection, It's a big area. It's a scary area. I mean, I was watching the Laura Kuenssberg program yesterday morning, and there was someone from the government, one of the MPs, I think, was saying that, kept reiterating the point that all of these tech companies are gathering much more data about than you realise. And it's really, really scary. I came to this decision about 5 years ago. I now do all of my internet searching over a VPN so that I hide who I actually am. And that stops companies from being able to collect my data, because my online digital identity is continually changing. And I do that because if you want to take my data, that's valuable to you. What do I get in return? All I get in return is I get targeted by stuff that I don't necessarily want. And, the more data these companies got on you, you don't get compensated when there's a big data breach and suddenly they've revealed your email address and the name of your dog from your social media feed and all that. You don't get compensated when they breach your data, but you also don't get compensated when they make money from your data. And I think that's where you have to take a personal choice and say, well, what can I do to protect my own my personal identity? You don't walk around on your own late at night flashing your cash around because someone might try to take it from you. You should have the same kind of view about your data when you sit in front of the screen and you're on the internet. So there are people out there that don't necessarily want to work in your best interest.
So is your opinion on that it's around a lack of quid pro quo, for example, as opposed to a fear of people being able to have more data on you?
It's interesting. I think that people's data has been abused for a long, long time. And, there's a reason that, some of the massive internet companies, social media companies have got to where they are. And, there's been numerous high profile data breaches and stuff. I think we've got to take a bit of personal responsibility for that. But at the same time, there needs to be these companies need to have better boundaries to make sure that they can't misuse your data without your knowledge. And I know, recent changes in law, GDPR goes a long way to do that. But what I've seen of things like GDPR is it penalizes the people that are working in the correct way and for the greater good. And the people that are the bad actors on the internet still get away with it. So it hasn't, all it's done is restricted the good guys and not actually done anything to target those that are really causing harm.
In what way?
Well, if you're a company and you put up a website, you've then got to put a privacy policy, and then you've got to tell people about what cookies are on your website, what data you're collecting, how you're going to use that data, how long you use it for. Yet, you go onto some of these sites, there's none of that. But those sites never get taken down. I mean, you get an email from my wife. Got it the other week. She put something on Facebook Marketplace for a table. 2 minutes later, someone phoned up, offered her the full price, and then she accepts. And then it's like, you're okay. What we're going to do is we're going to send a DPD courier to you, but don't worry about it. You've got to pay them, but we'll give you the extra money. They'll bring the money with them, but you need to pay for it up front. And then you get an email from DPD, and it's like, here's the email. Have you got an email from DPD? And if you can just follow the link and pay it, and then you look into it more closely, it's not actually from DPD. It's from like dpd-sendingnow.uk or something, and it's not actually DPD, and it's a scam. And it's very difficult for people to necessarily know that. And my wife got caught out for it, and it was only when they started saying that it was going to be £100 we had to pay up front to send a chair for £100 by DPD that we thought, hang on a minute, this sounds a bit dodge. And I then did an internet search and found that this is a very live scam at the moment. But it's just a really good example of how everyday normal people just, we could have thrown the furniture away. We weren't selling it for a massive amount of money, but rather than throwing it away, we wanted it to potentially go to another home so that it could be reused rather than thrown away. And then what happens is you're then targeted by scammers trying to extract money out of you. I think more can and should be done about that. And some of that's around internet registry and about reporting it, because it's almost impossible to report and get any of this cybercrime taken seriously. I think if you report, I can't think what they're called, the online, where you report online fraud and internet crime to, I learned the other day only about 4% of crimes are actually investigated, and all of that actually goes to, I think it's the Metropolitan or the City of London Police, that they do that on behalf of the country. And so, if only 4% of crimes even get looked at, how are we ever going to stop this?
Yeah. What I find interesting about this is that 5 years ago, this would have been a tinfoil hat on, right? Like it's the government's out to get me, or the people are out to get me and my data. Whereas actually that is the reality now, isn't it? And I think, do we think that maybe the perception of this and the way society exists? So I was thinking this with all the cookies and stuff that came out after GDPR. I've now hit a point, which is my own error, where that's become so normalized and I'm moving so quickly all the time. And we live in a society that's moving quickly all the time that you pull up the website, accept, and you just carry on. So it's almost like it hasn't solved anything really, because I've just accepted everything because I want to move quick. So I think that the challenge of society moving quickly and having access to these things at all times, even though we're educated on it, our behaviors might still be different. And if it's inherent behaviors that we have, maybe there's something else other than just educating people on it. Maybe we actually have to force people to do certain things. I'll give an example. So, cash machines. I heard this a long time ago, but previously when you put your card in and then the cash would come out and then the card would come out. And people would leave their card in the machine because they went to the card machine to get cash. Like that was why they wanted to do it. And so there was lots of reports of cards being left in the machine. That's because the behavior, regardless of whether you're educated on you should look after your card or not, the behavior is I'm going to take the cash and walk away. So they switched it so that your card now comes out first and then your cash, because you're far less likely to leave the cash in as a behavior. That's kind of what I mean. Like, do we need to somehow implement stuff that controls behaviors as opposed to hoping to educate people enough that they will change their behaviors by themselves?
I think it's a really important point. I don't think we can control behaviours. I think what we need to do is we need to be better at understanding human behaviour and working alongside it. And that's a great example with the cash machine. That's working with human behaviours. People will leave the card in because they've got the cash and they're off. So change the way the system works so that that human behavior isn't a negative part of that process. It's a really good example. And what you said about cookies is another big thing. The regulation is focused on, well, we've got to give people the right so they understand what's happening. But yeah, everyone just clicks, allow all, because you haven't got time for it. And even the regulators now saying that something different needs to happen about cookies, because we have all got into that, just click okay. Whereas at the beginning, we'd all skim through and read what was actually going on and what was being copied. Yeah. And that again is regulation isn't just giving people the knowledge about what's going on. Sometimes actually you just need to protect companies from doing what they want. Saying I'm going to rob you doesn't make it all right if I'm going to rob you. So you need to put a certain amount of restriction in there, I think.
How important do you think, tying this nicely into some of your leadership experience, how important do you think understanding human behaviors are from an internal perspective in your teams?
I think it's vital. In order to get the best out of your team, you need your team to be happy, and you will have a wide variety of different people, different backgrounds, with different ways of thinking. You don't necessarily know. You might have someone who's neurodiverse. You might have someone who's on the borderlines of anarchy, for example. I'm being careful, but using examples from my past. You've got to understand those people, because they've got to be able to relate to you. And the only way that will happen is if you relate to them. And if you can get that kind of empathy with your team, you will work so much better. They will be happier because they'll understand you and what you're asking of them. But also that, more importantly, they'll feel supported. And if they've got a problem, they come and talk to you. It's very, very often that we all have problems in our lives, and those problems can seep their way into your work life. And it's important that your staff can come to you for perhaps advice, perhaps help, perhaps just someone to listen to, whether it's financial issues, marital issues or something, or, something else. And because as a leader of people, if someone's got a problem, you can often help them and put things in place in the work environment to make their life just a little bit easier. And in return, they'll be a much happier member of staff, and they'll want to stay and work for you, and you'll get more out of them. But more importantly, you'll have a much more a happier member of staff, which I think is very key. I don't like people working in one of my teams that aren't happy. If they're not happy, why aren't they happy? Because everyone should be happy. And if there's a problem, let's try and sort it out.
So I'll ask the same question I asked earlier. How much of that is a facade? Where for certain, because we hear it a lot now, right? I want to encourage equality. I want different viewpoints. I don't want a myopic view on our business. I want multicultural people, all of these positive things. I want to understand my staff better. I care about happiness. I care about work-life balance. This is from the perspective of a leader now. Is that the reality? Like, do people just say this because that's become the lines to say?
I think there's a lot of that, if I'm honest. And I don't want to sound big-headed or egotistical, but I do try my best to operate in a way and treat people in the way that I expect to be treated. So, in previous leadership roles, when I take on a team, the first thing I'll normally do after meeting them and trying to get to know them is I'll actually sit down job with them. You train me in your job so I understand what you're doing. Because if I don't understand exactly what they're doing and how they work, how can I give them help, improve their work-life balance? So that's really important for me. And I think it really unlocks or it opens up doors of empathy between teams and leaders. I've seen it all too often where companies are like, yeah, we want to be diverse and we want this and we want that. On the whole, I have to generalize. On the whole, in my opinion, that is often more of a box-ticking exercise, or because it's the right thing to be seen to be doing rather than actually doing it. I prefer to live and breathe it. And I used an example with my current boss the other week. We were talking about diversity and stuff, and I said I have a big issue when as a management team we look and we say, right, we haven't got enough X in our team. We need to increase. Perhaps we haven't got enough ladies. Perhaps we haven't got enough, people from a poor background. And we should do more in that area. And we can't take that person on because we've got too many white middle class people, for example. And I said that, I can sit here and say, I'm white middle class. Yep, I've had a lot more opportunities than perhaps other people have had. But we can't flip things the other way and say, because you're white middle class, you can't do this, because what you're doing is the exact opposite of what you said. You want to be inclusive. So what you want to do is make sure that your decisions are based, if it is recruitment, for example, your decisions are based on the best possible candidate. But what you need to do is make sure that your advertising and your reach for those potential candidates covers all areas, whether it's diversity, whether it's people, different backgrounds, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's the key. And I think, so you get people that say it because it's the done thing, people that try to do it, but actually end up, removing people from backgrounds that you shouldn't necessarily do. And you got those people that absolutely live and breathe it, and those unconscious biases in those aren't there because it's been baked in from day one, i.e. we've reached everyone and now we'd focus on just who is the best candidate based on what they can do and how they do it, not where they come from, who they are, what gender, sex, whatever. And I think that's really important. And I try my best to be at that end of the spectrum.
It's a really interesting topic, isn't it? And I can see you being careful with how you word certain things. And for me, I think that's a huge piece of it, right? The fact that we're able to have a conversation about this, that we are being conscious about the type of words that we use in and how we describe certain things, for me is steps in the right direction, because that shows that we're at least thinking about it. And prior to that, there was probably a subconscious bias to not think about it because that's not the world that we'd lived in. So I think just understanding it and it being a topic of conversation is a huge step in the right direction. Even just understanding that you might have subconscious bias, whether you're aware of it or not, is a huge step in the right direction, isn't it?
Yes.
I think there's probably systems and infrastructure that you can put in place to ensure that doesn't seep through. But I think it's hopefully moving in the right direction. We say as upper class white men, right? Like that's the challenge of it is we're discussing it when we've only got our viewpoint of it. So I think it's an entire thing. But your perception then of technology as we start looking forward now in 2023 and 2024, we've had a few interesting pieces of news recently. ChatGPT coming out last year, taking over the world by storm. Everyone's loving it. I think it feels like the first time that people have become aware of the power of what AI can do without putting the tinfoil hats on again and going, oh, robots are going to take over the world. Like they can actually see the advantages of it because it's so powerful. But at the same time, within our world and tech startups and scale-ups, some of the VC funding starting to shrink. We had the whole Silicon Valley Bank stuff last week or the week before. How much is that going to affect tech moving forward? Where do you see that? And what do you think leaders of these tech startups and scale-ups need to be thinking about?
Really interesting topic. I think things have changed over the last couple of years. You alluded to this earlier on about the days of, I've got a startup and a good idea, and VCs jumping over themselves to throw millions of pounds at you as a startup. Those days are gone, and we've been seeing that with our current company. I think the whole world of startup funding has moved to a point where they're now saying, make X amount per year. Once you're a viable business, then we'll help you grow to where you need to be. And I think that's a real turning point. I don't necessarily see it's a positive turning point. It's not really a negative either. I think, in the boom, there were a lot of people that were just investing money because it's tech, therefore it's good. And, a lot of money was wasted. And I think so VCs and investors are being much more cautious, but I think that is then the previous mistakes are to the detriment of those startups that are really good, are really ethical, but are finding it difficult to get customers on board without that kind of help to be able to scale. So it's a really interesting point. I think things over the next couple of years will balance out again. I think VCs are doing a lot more due diligence on stuff, which is good. And I think hopefully the investment lines will start to open up again. On the areas of technology, again, I think a few years ago, if you're a startup, you mentioned AI and everyone jumped over themselves. Oh, they're in AI, it must be good, therefore we'll invest. It's definitely a startup that's going places. And, I think lots of people have had their fingers burnt in that. And, you say AI to someone and they think, oh, it's just another, load of rubbish. We're going to use AI to help me keep my milk cooler in the morning or something. It's like, no, not going to work.
That's buzzword, isn't it?
Yeah, AI has now people are beginning to see that actually there is some good from AI. ChatGPT, for example, is just a phenomenal advancement in that. And I think it's forced the other internet companies to open up some of the stuff they've been doing. I mean, most people have used ChatGPT, and I talk to people that haven't, and I say, do this. I showed a friend of mine the other day and got it to write a tune about her daughter. Just said, write about, she's 14, she's X, she's Y, you're not at home and you miss her. And it wrote out an entire song in like 10 seconds that she then sent on to her daughter. It's just amazing what it can do. But again, it's only as good as what is input into it. And so we've got to be a little bit careful for that. One of the big challenges with AI is just the cost of doing it. I haven't got any knowledge of the costs of ChatGPT, but it's computationally very expensive. And I think there are lots of companies in the last few years that have thrown everything at AI and then realized, they're suddenly saddled with a 250 grand a month cloud bill because of all that processing. So we've got to use these technologies in the right way for the right tool. I've worked with companies that, for example, if you run AI on video, for example, there's a lot of redundant information in video. So what they do is they trawl the video, remove all of the duplications in it, and then just put the differences through AI and then match it back up afterwards, which means that you process only about 10% of the video. So you get a 90% cost saving. Things like that make it much, much cheaper to do. And I think there's going to be a lot more of that innovation over the next couple of years.
Do you think we're still in the infancy of it?
Absolutely, yeah. AI is still very much it's infancy. ChatGPT is a great example. It does some fantastic stuff, but it still comes up with some massive bloopers if you don't give it the right stuff. And some areas it's not very good at. If you ask it to write you a piece of code in a certain language to do a certain thing, it will come out perfect code straight away. I've tried it. I've done it. You ask it something more nuanced about political views or ethics and that kind of stuff, it's not so good. And you can get some rather bizarre, I use the word carefully, some bizarre views coming out of ChatGPT because it doesn't have that necessarily that human filter to say that's right and that's wrong. And I think that's where we've got to be really careful with AI. It's about that ethical boundary and making sure that it's not just trained to give good answers, it's trained to give right ethical answers at the same time, whatever that may be. Yeah.
And I think that's, some of that is not necessarily a bad thing in my opinion, because it is in its infancy. I think people are still figuring out where the value point is, let alone what it can do. But I think as we understand, it reminds me of something like email first coming out and people being, weary of email or taking it on board and understanding how to use email and what email might mean moving forward and how it could change different areas of business and people's lives. But understanding where the value point is takes time with any of these technology pieces, doesn't it? I think the concern with something like AI is because the rate of change is so fast, we could end up in something that doesn't look particularly good or does bad things, and we almost can't peel it back. Do you think there's any concern of that?
I think I was just thinking as you're talking there, and I think the one thing we've got to be mindful of it is as people, we learn throughout our lives, and our biggest lessons come from our mistakes, not from our successes. And I think that's what we've got to find that balance with technology is, yes, you've got to allow wrong things to happen, but you've got to make sure that there's boundaries around that. So rather than rather than AI taking over the world and blowing everyone up with all the missiles it controls, it's like it suggests you could do that and you can stop it at that point. I think that's the key with everything. We've got to it's learning, and we've got to learn how best to use it. So we've got to do iterative small changes, see what happens, what goes wrong, implement changes to stop those problems happening so that it evolves and continually improves.
Do you think from a tech perspective generally, and in particular with software engineering, for example, do you think that's going to change people's roles moving forward? Let's fast forward 5 years and ChatGPT or whatever iteration of ChatGPT comes out into the market and has an ability to write code and connect data and all of these fantastic things. I'm sure it will. Is the demand skill set then, rather than a software engineer who can code, is it somebody that can utilize AI effectively to do what it needs to do?
I think there'll be a little bit of that. I mean, as a CTO of a startup, I'm currently writing a proof of concept app as one of the many things I'm doing. And I've actually used ChatGPT to write a small piece of software. But as a software engineer in that case, I can't say to ChatGPT, write me a proof of concept app, because you've got to tell it the parameters around which you want. Yep. And the skill of a software engineer, the best software engineers don't write the best code. They have the best parameters around which that code is written to the best output. So I think, you could say the role of the software engineer will change slightly, but I think what it means is the good engineers that think outside the box, that can really define what the ins and the outs are and what is required, they're going to be more valuable.
Very interesting. We'll have to pick up another episode in 5 years' time when we're part cyborg and see what the world's doing.
Absolutely.
In your viewpoint, for leaders of tech startups and scale-ups, whether it's got a tech perspective or not, as we move forward, what do you think are the most important things? If you were thinking of doing a tech startup right now, or you are scaling a tech startup, you've just raised some money or whatever it might be, what do you think are some of the key things that leaders need to be considering?
I think for me, the key thing is prioritization. You need to keep across everything you've got to do. You can't do everything. So you've got to continually prioritize and reprioritize what you're focusing on to make sure that you're delivering the fastest evolution you can of whatever you're doing. People should sit at the top of that, because you need to have the right people around you. If you're scaling, you need to scale at a speed that you can cope with. A lot of startups fail or do bad things because they scale too fast. You get these horror stories of, thousands of people starting a day into a startup, and then suddenly 2 years down the line, they're laying off 90% of their headcount because they can't keep it going.
Yeah.
I think all of those things you've got to be aware of. It's that constant reprioritization. These are our core values, what we're trying to do, and these are the challenges we've got. And what is a challenge today may not be a challenge or the biggest challenge tomorrow. And it's that continual reevaluation to make sure that you're still heading in the right direction.
Really good. Final topic probably as we approach probably 5 to 10 minutes left. And we've talked about this through personal experiences around mental health challenges and happiness and work-life balance, etc. I think it's brilliant. It's similar to the diverse and inclusive conversation. It's good that people are just talking about it. I think that's the immediate step in the right direction, because then people may stop and pause and think, well, maybe that person's having challenges that I don't understand. How important do you think happiness and work-life balance is for the success, from a leadership perspective, for the success of any company and what it's trying to do?
Absolutely vital. It's my number one. I don't talk about work-life balance. I talk about life-work balance, because we shouldn't be working to live. We should be living to work. Sorry, the other way around. Our private life is what should be really driving us, and you shouldn't be getting up in the morning going, "Oh, I need to go to work." People coming to work need to be happy, and that is the priority. Because if someone comes into you, it doesn't matter if they give you 50 hours a week when they're only supposed to give you 35. If they're very unhappy, you're a leader with a member of your staff who's very unhappy, which for me would destroy me, because I want everyone to be happy and have that balance. But I think also, if you look at it on a purely business perspective, an unhappy employee will not be producing as high a quality output as someone who is happy, if you take all of the ethics aside. And, we all, you get to know people you work with, you get to like, some people you like, some people you don't. But ultimately, I certainly don't go to work to think, I don't care that they're unhappy because I'm me. I think, is there anything I can do to help that person be a bit happier? It's saying hello to that person that not many people talk to in the office, asking someone if they're all right when they look a bit sad. All the kind of things that, if you put yourself in their position, or what you think their position might be, that you'd expect everyone else to do. And I think that's really key. I think also the one positive that's come out of COVID in the last few years is the fact that we're now talking about this much more openly, about work-life balance, life-work balance, and the issues around that and mental health, and giving people much more flexibility around work so that it doesn't impact on life so much, because life's important, family is important, work is important, but it's more there to pay the bills than actually for us to live for, because, we've all got things outside work. And, making small changes in the way you operate your teams can make a big difference. Flexibility. I've been a big believer in the fact that if you're flexible with your team flexible back with you. So, if you have a big problem and you want to ask people to go above and beyond because we need to sort something out, if you can't do that when they've got a problem, why are they going to say, yeah, of course I'll come and help you out, and I'll work Saturday for you for nothing. So I think it's a two-way street, and I think COVID has helped that come to the forefront, and staff are now able to say, I actually want to have a bit more flexibility. I've got a child that I need to take to nursery in the morning. I need to start a little bit later. Well, in my opinion, as long as you get the job done and we know about it in advance, and so you're not missing meetings because they've been scheduled that time, doesn't matter. Of course it is. What's important is that you get your child to have that time with your child, and if you work later in the evening. I think a lot of people with kids are breaking up their workday more so that they can do the bits with their kids, do the work, do the bits with the kids, do a bit more work. Ultimately, the output is the same. In fact, the output's probably better because the member of staff feels more empowered and more looked after.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think a lot of the things we've discussed today boil down to societal norms over a very long period of time that just then become accepted and embedded into your life. And I think what COVID did was put the pause button on it and make people go, well, hang on, why am I doing it this way? Why do we work 5 days a week? Why do I work in an office? Why all of these different things? And it's just because, well, that's what you do. Like in the same way that as a kid, you go to school every day, like no one's questioned some of these things. And I think it's brilliant that we are questioning some of it. And I think a lot of us still don't know what the right answer is at the end point, because we're still trying to figure it out, right? Like some of the internal challenges we've had are around how you trust within that infrastructure. So balance is brilliant, but being able to manage and get trust both ways, how do you measure that? And is that given straight away? Like if I start in a startup, I'm expected to be trusted immediately. Like how does that look when you then compare that to trying to manage somebody's work-life balance? Like how would you try to establish trust with people? And is there a measurement for it?
So it's interesting what you just said just then. If I was employing someone and I didn't trust them, then I shouldn't be employing them, full stop. I think trust is one of those things that I think you should start with. And if it's proven that you can't be trustworthy, then something happens rather than earning people's trust. I think it sounds quite grand saying it that way. I think with staff, yeah, there's a certain amount you've got to earn their trust. And I think that comes through empathy. And that's why getting to know your team, working with them, regular check-ins is really important. The shift to remote working, people go, it doesn't work because we need to be in the office to talk to people. You don't. You just need to change the way you do things. I quite often now I'll go on chat and chat one of my colleagues and say, how are you doing? And then jump straight on a call. And then I'll vent or they'll vent about something that's happened, and you get it out and then you finish the call much happier. Those are the kind of things you would do if you're in an office 5 days a week. But just because you're not in an office doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And I think if you're having those regular check-ins with staff, then trust is automatically there because you know what's going on in that person's life. If you're speaking to them every day on screen because you're remote, you know if they're having a bad time because you can see it. You can see these people are struggling. And if they feel you're approachable, like they can phone you up at any point and talk to you, like they could grab you in the office, I think then that's where, it's that empathy. Your staff can come to you, come to your staff, and ultimately everyone works for the greater good of everyone, not just the business.
Really good. Well, it's been a pleasure to chat to you, James. I've got one more question. And I'm going to ask all the guests this, inspired by Stephen Bartlett's question that he asks at the end of his podcast. What makes you happy? Oh,
that's really interesting. So the first word that comes to mind is success. But then, what do you define success as? And I would say then success comes back to happiness, and happiness is about life-work balance. That's what I would put it as. 10 years ago, I worked in London 5 days a week, commuting on the train every day. I now work 100% remote and go into London once a month. And I've moved out to the country, and I'm so much happier for it. I live where I want to be. I've got what I want, and I think that's what I think that's my success measure. I think is that the happiness, and I think that's what's important.
Very good. Always a pleasure, James. We're gonna wrap things up there. Anything you want to add to anything or any of the conversations that we've had up to this point? We've covered a lot.
No. Just wanted to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Always. Right. I will end the podcast now. We're going to get this posted on various social media websites, whether that ends up being hacked later another time or something. Oh, God knows. But yeah, it's been a real pleasure to speak to you, James. Thank you for your time, and we'll catch up with you soon.
Thank you very much. Wonderful.